And just because we have had a couple of people over at that other side, we're just going to wait another minute, but it is super to see so many people here. It really is. It's really, Ohio redistricting activists are special. They have grit. They have perseverance. They're indestructible, even though those folks are trying very, very hard. But anyway, we want to welcome you all, and we will get started because we do have a lot to cover tonight. So I'm going to share my slides. And I'm going to just start right out and welcome everybody and thank you for being here and talk about the agenda here. We're going to talk about the latest developments. We're going to take a little bit of a deep dive into some states that have got redistricting right and how they do it. As promised, we're going to go a little bit deeper on the independent state legislature theory. We're going to talk about what's coming up next and, of course, our picnic. So without any further ado, I believe that he is here. I'm going to turn this over to Collin Marozzi from the ACLU.
Well, thank you so much, Mia. And as always, thanks so much to everybody for being here. Always great to be around and to catch up on all things redistricting in Ohio. I'm going to be taking a couple of minutes this evening to talk about kind of where things stand on the redistricting litigation. I know it's been a little while since we've kind of done a snapshot of where we're at. So I am going to be brief because I know we've got a lot to talk about tonight. But first, I want to focus on the General Assembly districts. Also, just to start, a couple of weeks ago, the Ohio Supreme Court issued a order that kind of led to a little bit of confusion in terms of what was and was not pending. Essentially, the Supreme Court issued an order denying as moot one of our contempt motions. And the State House Press, you know, how I know they work so hard on covering all things redistricting that there seemed to be some confusion as to which motion that order referred to. The Supreme Court actually, in their ruling, denied as moot a motion that we made back in February. I think there was a clerical administrative error that it simply did not. It wasn't, you know, denied as moot after the commission had met and redrawn another map. But we currently do still have a motion to have the Ohio Supreme Court compel the Redistricting Commission to provide evidence as to why they have not met. As we know, after the fifth set of legislative maps, or maybe even the sixth now, was ruled unconstitutional. The Supreme Court gave the Redistricting Commission until June 3rd to draw a new set of maps. And as we all know, and as is incredibly infuriating, the commission simply didn't meet. They acknowledge that they have no business, they have no interest in complying with the order from the Supreme Court. So in response, we filed a motion to have them come forward and explain why they couldn't meet. This was done as kind of an enticing step to get the Supreme Court to act. They've been, they've been reluctant, and they've been steadfast in their reluctance to move forward on any sort of contempt motions that either we or the Equal Districts Coalition have put forth. So we are still pushing for a hearing for the court to order to have the commission members come forward and say why they are no longer even attempting, even pretending to attempt to create fair maps. Again, we are still waiting to hear from that, and I know it's extremely frustrating that we haven't gotten a answer we like from the Supreme Court on this issue, but that motion is still pending and is still before the court. They have the opportunity and the power to fulfill that motion and fulfill that request whenever they want. However, with election season coming forward, we're now in full swing with the general election on November 8th. It is, my personal opinion is I don't foresee the Supreme Court requiring this motion. However, I hope I'm wrong. I hope I am wrong on that. Also in new redistricting news was the order from the Ohio Supreme Court declaring the second congressional map invalid. As we know, this was a motion that was made, or an objection that was filed by both the League and the ACLU, as well as the motion to have the map ruled as invalid from the Equal Districts Coalition as well. Surprisingly, or I guess I would say I think it's a good sign, and I'm pleased with it, is that the ACLU and the League only asked for 2 districts to be changed. But the Ohio Supreme Court in this case went one step further, and they invalidated the map in its entirety. So again, though the map will not change, the map that we voted on in the primary in May is the operative map. It will be in place for November. There will be a redraw process at some point before the 2024 elections, because as we know, this map has been deemed unconstitutional. And I would want to point out, unlike the General Assembly maps and the orders from the Ohio Supreme Court demanding a redraw of the map, the redraw criteria and the procedure for redrawing is not solely held in the order from the Supreme Court. The procedure for redrawing congressional districts is actually prescribed in our Constitution. It is a requirement in Article 19, Section 3, that anytime a congressional map is deemed unconstitutional, a 30-day clock starts for the General Assembly to redraw the new congressional map. And if they fail to do so, then the Ohio Redistricting Commission has an immediately subsequent 30 days to draw that map. That's not an Ohio Supreme Court order. That is language explicitly included in Article 19. So I bring this up only to say that when we talk about, and when we are writing our letters to the editor, when we're talking to our friends, family, and neighbors about the shameless lawlessness that we have seen over this redistricting process, when we're talking about the congressional redraw, if the General Assembly and the Redistricting Commission do not meet, they are not only thumbing their nose at the Ohio Supreme Court and refusing to follow a lawful order of the Ohio Supreme Court like they are for General Assembly districts. Instead, they are actively violating prescribed language of the Ohio Constitution, because those 30-day windows are explicitly prescribed in Article 19. I think this is a huge deal, and I think this is something that we need to be shouting from the rooftops in the event they don't pass a map by the end of that 60-day window, which coincidentally falls on September 17th. Now, that's a weekend, so that the deadline for redrawing actually falls to that Monday, September 19th, which I think is interesting because we have our picnic on September 18th. So hopefully we will be gathering and evaluating a new map. I hope that is the case. But I do want to reiterate that, as incredibly infuriating as this process is, and how the commission continues to thumb their nose at the court orders for the General Assembly districts, for congressional, this is, again, explicitly prescribed in the Constitution. It would be like, violating any other provision of our state constitution that is explicitly prescribed, and we cannot stand for that. What happens if the Supreme Court doesn't, or if the commission doesn't meet to draw a new map after that 30-day window or the 60-day window outlined in the Constitution? Remains to be seen. The Ohio Supreme Court retains jurisdiction to review these cases. But I just want everybody to know that we're not comparing apples to apples here. This is a completely different set of circumstances and of procedures for the congressional redraw. So I know if folks are amped up and they're writing letters to the editor, they're talking to their friends and family, make that distinction. Talk about how this 60-day redraw window is constitutionally prescribed. It's not just a court order. It is language from our foundational document from the amendments that we all passed back in 2018. And it should be treated as such. I see Scott has his hand up. That is essentially my spiel. Again, the General Assembly still has time to redraw a new map. We aren't expecting them to come back and meet. But should they not meet, the Ohio Redistricting Commission, according to the Ohio Constitution, has until mid-September to draw a new map. So that's just a brief update of where we are, and I will stop now. And I know Scott has his hand up. If we want, we can do questions and answer in the chat while people still present.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think sure. Why don't we do questions in the chat for now? That would be great. So when it comes to the General Assembly, they're lawless because they're disobeying a court order. But when it comes to the congressional map, they're lawless because they're disobeying not only a court order, but the Constitution itself. And so that's a pretty important distinction. And so, Collin, just so I understand it, so if they draw a map, let's say they did draw a map now, they can start now, or they can break the law and start later. But whatever they draw is still going to be reviewed by the Ohio Supreme Court. So we could still be in this cycle of them drawing a bad map and it being struck down again. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, say that again, Mia. I was looking at.
I was saying that it's still under review of the court, which means that
Yes.
if they draw another map and it's still gerrymandered and the court reviews it, they can still strike it down, correct?
Yes.
Yes. So we haven't actually, we haven't actually exited the system yet. We're still in the system where we're going around. Now I highlighted when on this slides here, I highlighted the number of toss-up seats, and we have that down at the bottom there. The number of seats that they say lean Democratic and the number of seats that they say lean Republican, but the percentage that are toss-up are very, very high. And most of those, the asymmetry that was the problem in the maps was most of those toss-ups were according to the Redistricting Commission that drew them up, they were actually Democratic because they slightly lean Democratic. So what that means when you look at these maps together, this set of maps and this map together, there are many, many toss-up seats that it's really going to depend a lot on turnout, whether we get, a bad map or a bad result or a catastrophically bad result in terms of, how closely it aligns with what we think would actually be fair. So that's why I just wanted to say, when we continue our advocacy around these maps, turnout really, really is important. I know that it sucks to have to go and vote on an unconstitutional map. It really does. It really sucks. But if we don't go and vote on these unconstitutional maps, then, because so many of these districts are toss-ups and they're just narrowly in favor of the Democrats, we really could get a very bad outcome. So we need to elect people who are going to support democracy and who are going to support fair maps. And so we need to make sure that we get out there and we talk to candidates and we ask them about how they're going to support fair redistricting, what they think about a redistricting commission, what they think about the redistricting process, et cetera. We put together a list of questions that you can ask candidates, and we really think it's important that you get out there and you actually vote in November, and that you advocate for people to vote in November so that we limit the damage that's being done. So other advocacy that you can do around the maps. Last month, we had Professor Niven here. I've put links here to the slides in the recording. And he was talking about Indianola Avenue and what happened during one set of maps and what happened in another set of maps, and how they were redrawn in order to capture as many Republican districts as possible, and all the kinds of tricks that went on. Those are the kinds of stories that will make a difference when we're looking at the next set of maps that are drawn. Map making is going to start again, whether it's right away or whether it's after the election. So I'm really encouraging folks to take a deep dive and look at their own districts, look at the current map, look at the previous map, see where those lines are, see why they were drawn in different ways, and tell a story about how those lines disenfranchise you or disenfranchise your community. So that's something we're asking you to do. We're also asking you to think about the whole concept of taking the keys away. If a drunk driver says that he'll reform and then he does it again, at a certain point, you need to take the keys away. And these legislators who have been they drew bad maps in 2011, and they drew them again repeatedly over and over again in 2021, 2022. It's time to take the keys away. Take a look at the Ohio redistricting timeline. We've got a link here. We've got a link at the end. It has the whole story of what happened. But I think everything that happened is leading us towards the conclusion that we have to have a better way of doing this. We tried, but these guys were not willing to abide by the spirit or the letter of the law. And so we need a better way of doing it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine Turcer, who's going to talk to us about a better way to do it.
Well, hey, everybody. So I noticed there are a bunch of kind of questions going on in the chat. So let's make sure that we have those conversations. Scott's being very patient, for example. I think we're all trying to figure out kind of, well, what can we do? And so the next section is going to be about like what we're thinking about and how we're doing a little bit of looking at the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. And then also, I really do want to encourage you there are actions that we can take now. And with that, I'm going to go through the different states that do what we could think of as an insulated independent citizens commissions. And so the first state to look at is Arizona. Now, Arizona has actually had a couple cycles, having this commission. I think we can learn a lot from them. We also have California that's now on their second cycle. So they just finished the second. And then, of course, we have two places that passed reforms in 2018, the way that we did, but they put in place citizens commissions. So there's Colorado and then Michigan. And once again, you all are gonna get these slides. And also the links. I know for myself, I want to take deep dives and look at everything. I was pleased that they kept the archived websites. So for all of us, we can look and see, well, what happened in states that did this differently. And so Mia, if you'll move us to the next slide, I did want to highlight some of the things that make a difference as we're thinking about making a makeup of a commission. So one of the things, when you look at, for example, Arizona, it's a very small number of people. And the appointment process, it comes from legislative leaders. So looking at, how do you get to the diversity, for example, of the, the state of Ohio or, the diversity, let's say California, that notion that it may be useful to think about, we just can't say independent citizens commissions. We need to be thinking about, well, how many folks work the best? And then also, I think it's important to think about the different ways that folks are selected. And so like Michigan, we're talking about almost like jury duty. So very kind of randomly created pool, legislators can strike them, but it's, there isn't the same kind of examination as Arizona or the panel of judges for Colorado. So I think we'll have to think through as we think about options going forward, how it is we would want to make this up. And now with that, Mia, if you'll go to the next slide, they call this qualifications, but one of the things that's clear about these states is that they intentionally said no to folks, the folks that have conflicts of interest. And so, and Michigan, for example, doesn't just look at like, your current conflicts of interest or your past conflicts of interest, for example, not a lobbyist for 3 years. They're also looking and saying, hey, if you're going to be part of this commission, there's a prohibition on seeking office for the next 5 years. So they're really trying to get at folks that are ordinary, Ohioans and not those folks that are politically connected. And you'll notice, including, campaign workers, donations. And so it's important to, if we try to think about insulation and creating a commission that works better than our Ohio Redistricting Commission, these are some of the things that we can think about. If you go to the next slide, Mia. This is interesting because, of course, Michigan is our neighbor. And these rules, as you look at them, they're somewhat familiar, but there isn't what we would call the representational fairness criteria. And I believe that that Dr. Dick Gunther is on the call today, who spent a lot of time, advocating for us. And this goes back, before the 2011 Ohio Redistricting Commission, to have a really clear metric. So this is accepted measures of partisan fairness. And so this is a little bit looser than having a specific metric that we have in the Ohio state, the Ohio Constitution, that focuses at looking at elections that are statewide over a 10-year period and coming up with a partisan index. And that's, that's that 54, 46% RD that we're familiar with. That's the metrics that's in the Ohio Constitution. And so one of the things as we're thinking about, okay, what are the reforms that would make a difference? We also need to be thinking about, well, what are the rules? So, this gives you kind of an idea, like, does it make sense to say accepted measures of partisan fairness, or do we want to actually have a good metric? And then, Mia, if you'll move us to the next slide, one of the things that struck me as really interesting has to do with how these folks voted in Arizona, California, Colorado, and Michigan. So California was unanimous when they approved their maps, unanimous. And this is congressional maps, I should highlight that, unanimous decision. With Arizona 3-2, Colorado 11-1, Michigan 8-5. One of the things that this says is that in fact, what, as you look at this is wildly different. These were approved in a bipartisan fashion. I think that's really important as we think of, well, what should we do moving ahead? I noticed that Pam said, are you talking about going back to the voters again? I feel you, I hear you. And obviously we should think very carefully and we should look at what happened in other states. Now, if you move to this one, so this slide is about efficiency gap. So the best way to think about this is a metric, and Tiffany's gonna throw in plan score, which will give you a little bit more information about how the efficiency gap works. But essentially, it's understood to be the number of votes that it would take for a candidate to win. And they consider the rest of that to be, they call them wasted votes, which I think is a terrible term, but to understand that what happens with packing, like if you think about packing and like all of a sudden there's there's not the competition that you'd like to see. And so this metric is all about the packing. So now clearly getting to 0 is nearly impossible, but it's important to look at kind of the differences. And you might say, well, 9.2, that's pretty high. But of course, we always need to remember that when we think of efficiency gap metrics, we also have to take into account the way that folks live. Democrats tend to live in cities, in suburbs. Republicans tend to live in the more rural areas, and so there, clearly you look at Colorado and you're like, oh wow, they were really close to being, really efficient maps. And then I think it's important to do that comparison with that Ohio congressional map, 15.3. So that's what walks us through a little bit of information about these citizen maps, these insulated commissions. I wanted to give you just a little bit of information. Now, Dan, I'm going to hand this off to you, but I wanted to see, Dan, of course, pays attention to redistricting nationally. And Dan, if you had something that you wanted to add about this overview, that would be wonderful. And then, he's moving on to talk about the independent state legislature theory. But before we move to that, Dan, do you have a few things you'd like to add?
Well, yeah, I'll just say that, we've learned a lot over a couple of redistricting cycles, about the involvement of legislators in striking, which in California we thought would be a good thing because legislators can sort of smell party hacks, but that hasn't really worked out as well as we thought it would in California. So that's been an issue to consider when you're figuring out how to appoint people. In Michigan, which has a very randomized process, as Catherine described, it doesn't really seek out expertise explicitly. I think you ended up with commissioners who maybe had to rely a little bit more on consultants who sometimes gave bad advice. All of these models have some problems that we've learned from, but all of them are also significantly better than the legislature or a partisan politician commission, as you've seen, having them draw districts. So there's a lot, I think we can learn from the models that are out there and adjust to kind of what's appropriate for Ohio if if the coalition decides to go that route and go back to the voters again.
Dan, thank you.
Yeah. So with that, Catherine and Mia asked me to come on to talk a little bit about a case that's going to be before the Supreme Court in its fall term because it has some potential national implications. It's called Moore v. Harper. At issue is something called the independent state legislature theory. And I'm going to get into a little bit about what that case is about. So just to give you an overview of what I'm going to discuss in this shortish presentation, give a little background what the origin is of Moore v. Harper, some of the constitutional issues that the case get into, some history and cases, what is the precedent on the issues at hand? What does it look like in Supreme Court's history? And some of the potential implications. So go ahead and move the next slide. So the background, Moore v. Harper, as it's now captioned, originates in several lawsuits, including one from Common Cause, challenging North Carolina's congressional map as a partisan gerrymander that violates the state constitution, violates the North Carolina Constitution. In that case, we won. North Carolina Supreme Court ordered the trial court to then appoint special masters to draw a new congressional map. That was in February 2022. The very next month, the defendants in the case of North Carolina's Republican legislative majority went to the Supreme Court of the United States, asking them to hear the case. They filed a petition for a writ of certiorari. And in June, we learned that the Supreme Court did in fact agree to hear that case in the fall. That requires four votes to hear a case. So go ahead to the next slide. So again, the case is called Moore v. Harper. Let me just give you kind of the summary of the so-called independent state legislature theory. The bottom line is what North Carolina legislators are hoping the Supreme Court will rubber stamp is the view that state courts cannot exercise any oversight over legislatures when it comes to setting rules for federal elections. And where does this theory originate? It comes from the language of the Elections Clause. The language there, as you can see, I'll read it because it's pretty important. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof, but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing senators. So what the legislature in North Carolina is looking for is a very, very literal reading of the word legislature in that clause. In some ways you can see, well, I guess it's sort of logical, right? It says the word legislature, but I think as we get into some of the background and the potential implications, you'll see that it's a patently absurd approach. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. The history of this theory kind of originates, or the kind of the modern history, I guess I'd say, with Bush v. Gore, concurrence by Chief Justice Rehnquist, Justices Thomas and Scalia. They mused about it a bit in the fight over the presidency of Bush v. Gore. Just to give one of our kind of responses to this idea that legislature should be taken very literally. We know that the framers of the Constitution knew a thing or two about language. They knew how to grant sole and unreviewable authority, the kind of superpowers for that the legislature seeks over federal elections in this case. For example, the Constitution includes language granting the U.S. Senate sole power to try all impeachments. No such authority is granted in the elections clause of state legislatures. So it's a really strange approach that they're trying to take. So let's go to the next slide and take a look at some of the SCOTUS precedent that really demonstrates why this is such a weird theory that defies history and logic. Interestingly, one of the first cases to really test this approach to the reading of the elections clause came out of Ohio. The legislature passed a congressional map. The voters didn't like it. They exercised referendum power granted to them in the state constitution, struck down the map. And the ruling in that case, so then the state legislature complained to the U.S. Supreme Court saying, hey man, voters can't do this. Elections clause gives us the right, uninhibited by anybody, to pass a congressional map. And the Supreme Court said, no, that's ridiculous. That the state legislature, its elections clause power is not independent of the state constitution. It's got to be bound by it. The state legislature is bound by the state constitution. Therefore, voters can strike it down per state law. Another case came in 1932 out of Minnesota, Smiley v. Holm. In that case, this was about a governor's veto. Minnesota's normal state laws in basically every state, granting the governor the authority to sign or veto legislation. Minnesota, again, went to the state Supreme Court and said, hey, we have this right. It's right there in the elections clause. The governor can't veto our congressional map. We have superpowers under over federal elections. And again, the Supreme Court rejected that idea, stating that congressional elections, or the legislature's power to regulate congressional elections must be exercised under state law in accordance with the state constitution. I'll go ahead and move to the next slide. More recently, a couple of cases where this question has come up. 2015, a case that Collin Marozzi was very active in organizing amicus briefs. The Arizona state legislature was, obviously angry, as legislators often are, about this power taken from them to gerrymander. In 2000, Arizona voters went to the polls to create the commission that Catherine described in the last section. And the Arizona legislature asked the Supreme Court to strike down the commission's power to draw congressional maps, again, based on this extremist reading of the elections clause. And Supreme Court, in a decision authored by Justice Ginsburg, stated that the elections clause, the word legislature, means the entire legislative process, including the ballot initiative, allowing voters to go to the polls and change how it's done. And even more recently, 2019, a case that, while it drives a stake through my heart to think about it, Rucho v. Common Cause, some of you may remember, we tried to go to the Supreme Court asking for a federal prohibition on partisan gerrymandering, arguing that it violated the U.S. Constitution, the Bill, First Amendment and 14th Amendment specifically. While we didn't get our way, the court said that partisan gerrymandering is non-justiciable. It's a political question. The language of the decision, authored by Chief Justice Roberts, did state that the reason why courts didn't really need to get involved, federal courts didn't need to get involved, is because there's state court oversight over redistricting, and that rules could be installed into the state constitution, banning partisan gerrymandering, so that state action could happen. So we think that's very favorable language for our side. Go ahead, next slide. So again, just overview of some of the the kind of most extreme implications, depending on how a decision goes, is that state constitutional protections, like for example, in North Carolina and Pennsylvania, there's language state called free and fair elections clauses protecting voters. Obviously in Ohio, there's language that very specifically prescribes how redistricting should go and some voter protections. They could be possibly rendered null and void as they relate to federal elections. You could see this expand beyond redistricting to partisan manipulation of election administration more broadly, potential impact on other voting rules, vote by mail, registration, basically any rules that apply to federal law. There could be a rejection of any kind of state court oversight or use of the state constitution to protect voters. So move to the next one. Implications in Ohio, we've already, as many of you know, we already saw some leaders of the Ohio Redistricting Commission kind of give a nod to this theory, sort of complaining about judicial oversight overall, arguing that the court really had no authority to issue any sort of contempt citation. I would say that one sort of shining light in this, silver line, sorry, I lost the phrase there, is that I think the most extreme version of independent state legislature theory is not likely. It's sort of rejecting any kind of state court oversight on any federal rules. I think I think we can win this case. I think history and logic and original intent is all on our side. I think we can win this case. But in the event that we don't, I think the most likely loss is a narrow loss, maybe one that states if a state constitution does not explicitly grant state courts the power to provide oversight on redistricting, then they do not have that power. That's obviously not the case in Ohio. The state constitution is clear, as Collin detailed. So I think, that which means, as much as, does it keep me up at night? There's not doom and gloom here. We have the ability, I think, to try to push for better reforms, to take what happened this cycle in Ohio, which is incredibly frustrating, and learn from it and make this the system better. And I think that would be upheld. There may be an opportunity. I think we're going to be looking for amicus briefs signed by members of Congress, state legislatures. We may ask for your help to give them a little nudge to sign on to some of those. So we're figuring that out right now. But I think there's definitely a path forward nationally and in Ohio. I think let's see, do I have one more slide or is that it for me? That might be it. There we go. All right. Thanks, guys.
Well,
Thank
I
you
think
so
this,
much,
this
Dan.
is a perfect time to ask some questions because we've been putting them off. So I figured I'd start with some questions. So starting with Lindsay, she wondered, she said, I hope you'll be discussing the pros and cons of constitutional amendments versus the ballot initiatives. So one of the things that, we're very mindful of is that citizen initiatives are hard work. First of all, there's the getting the signatures. Secondly, it is not like a no vote. It can be very hard. Ohio voters tend to be conservative. And by that, I don't mean that, Republicans. I mean that they tend to vote no if they don't understand. They tend to be very cautious about these things. And we know that you can get incredibly horrible language from the ballot board, where if it is initiated, an amendment to the Constitution is initiated by the state legislature, the language can be much better. And so we will be continuing to have conversations about, well, what makes sense for our next steps? And also some of the kinds of challenges, that we have. And then it sounded like Mia had some housekeeping tips before I go through any more questions. Mia, do you want to pop in?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. This is from Alfred. What is the timing? Well, I think that's a very good question. It takes time to plan these things. It takes time to raise money. It takes time to work through what the best specific reform is. And because, many of us on this call participated in efforts where we lost. And I noticed that Joan Lawrence, for example, is here. And so that first loss in 1981. And then for others, we were there for that loss, with the Citizen Initiative in 2005. And for many, many of us, we were there for that loss 10 years ago. And so as you're thinking about timing, this is about moving slowly, thoughtfully, and cautiously. But we also need, to obviously move things along, because it is very clear that just having good rules is not enough. It's incredibly painful that constitutional officers would choose not to follow the Constitution. But the way I've talked about is drunk on power. And what do? You take the keys away from drunks, and that's what we need to do when it comes to the map making. But this is a slow process. So Tommy was asking, how do you plan to respond to the misinformation from the Republican majority regarding redistricting? And she specifically identifies Secretary of State Frank LaRose, who spoke on Sunday's CBS State of the State, and essentially said that the reason there was a second primary is because of a politically motivated Ohio Supreme Court. And this is a time for all of us. We may all have different ideas about how to do this, but this is a truth to power time. This is a truth to power time. Clearly, that is a bunch of nonsense.
Right. Catherine, I
Yes.
just want to interject. As a part of this clarifying the truth to the voters, we have a lot on the line this election, and this misinformation's out there by the people that many people will listen to, and they think they're being truthful. So what can we do to get a slate of statewide candidates elected that will be more honest with the map process, and also not have them just wait to see who wins the races and the Supreme Court, because they already know they won't have to ever draw another map, because those people will be totally different on the court.
Yeah, so what's really clear to me is there are not easy answers. Common Cause does have a project that looks at misinformation around elections. That is something that Tiffany spends time on. For a lot of us, spending time on social media and pushing back on nonsense, it's very hard work, but I would encourage you to get involved with that. Tiffany, why don't you throw in your email so that folks can request more information about that. We'll also send you a follow-up with how to get engaged with that. Now, I'm not gonna get to every question. Okay, so this is from Rob. He wants to know who will be running for the commission, and who do we hold accountable in November? So it's important to remember that there are statewide officers on the Ohio Redistricting Commission: governor, auditor, secretary of state. Clearly, this November is an opportunity to hold these folks accountable. It's clearly an opportunity to highlight how they did not follow the Ohio Constitution. And for many of us, the nonpartisan folks are talking about how they need to be held accountable. For others, they may be engaging in more direct election work. But one of the things that is really important, as we think about the kind of nonpartisan work, what we can all do is really highlight the importance of that Supreme Court, and the importance of electing folks that in fact will be paying attention to our rights and our freedoms. And so one of the things that different organizations that are doing this year, and you'll see the palm card right there, are spending time just making sure people continue to vote for, not just be thinking about governor, auditor, secretary of state, but to also be thinking about those Supreme Court races, because they are incredibly important. There was an incredibly important decision today that allows for a clean energy. And so, I would encourage us, when we're having conversations and we're out there registering voters, to encourage people to participate in these Supreme Court elections. We have a ton of materials, and these are things that are easy to request. So we'll get materials to you as soon as possible. Trevor is on top of it. And so then as I'm going through, hang on. Mark Selling is really interested, and Mark Selling could probably actually make this map, but he's interested in a map that shows the toss-ups. So one of the things that we'll do in the follow-up, Mark, because I think you're absolutely right, when we're encouraging people to focus on those races that are toss-ups and get greater interest and accountability in those races, we'll make sure that you have that map so that you can say, oh yeah, that's in my neck of the woods, or hey, it's a distance, you know, that doesn't exactly impact me, but I still want to get out the vote as much as possible. So let's see. Debbie Dalkey is worried because people may not know their districts, and they certainly aren't going to know about the toss-ups. And so this is one of the things that we can do as we're doing kind of voter registration programs, as we're attending, you know, any kind of outside activities. This is an opportunity to really highlight that. Let's see, anything, y'all are being super patient. Well, we may need to move on. I was kind of going through all the possible different questions. You know, as we think about it, one of the things that I think folks are really interested in, Dan, before we kind of wrap up, could you tell us a little bit about when the US Supreme Court will you know, will in fact hear the case, when a decision is likely, and then are there ways that we can get engaged related to that?
So right now there's been a briefing schedule set with most briefs due sometime in October. There hasn't been an oral argument set yet, you know, November, probably December likely. After that, you know, we may not have a decision. You know, the Supreme Court tends to release its most controversial decisions at the very end of the term, the end of June, so it might be a while. I think in the meantime, we're still, you know, like I kind of mentioned in my presentation, I think we may end up looking to get signatories, elected officials on, you know, Republicans, Democrats, both on amicus briefs. And I think that we may come to folks trying to get, you know, encourage targeted legislators to sign those, but we're still kind of sorting out the amicus strategy right now.
And Mia, you had some housekeeping things you wanted to mention.
No, I'll get to it when I get to my section, but I just wanted to kind of move along because we still have a lot of stuff to cover. Thank you so much.
So you all have been looking at the slide for a while, but there are lots of different ways to get engaged and do our part to work on democracy. Mia, if you'll move to the next slide. I also wanted to highlight that the Ohio Debate Commission is organizing a webinar on August 25th. It's at noon. You know, the whole idea of the debate commission was, hey, we need to have these good debates, but of course, you know, they're looking at Supreme Court races and they're looking at gubernatorial races, but there are so many different races. Many of you on this call have participated in doing debates and, you know, set this up. But for those of you who think, okay, well, what can I do to improve the discourse, to get information to people? Think about putting on a debate, and this webinar is a good way to get started. And Mia, if you'll pull up the next slide, the thing that's really interesting, and I think that is super helpful, is that they created these debate playbooks, basically giving, you know, frequently asked questions and all of the things that you might need. They have them in multiple languages, and so, you know, I just wanted to highlight that this is something, you know, something that will help communities all around Ohio. And, you know, if you're talking to somebody about, you know, about how to get engaged and what you can do, and we all need things to do. This has been incredibly, incredibly painful. And yes, there are challenges to debates. There are many times that not both parties want to participate. But we should be very clear with candidates that we expect it. It may not come to fruition, but it's incredibly important for us to hear directly from candidates. And on that note, Mia.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to just reiterate what I said at the beginning, that each month we're going to send a new link. So if you have a link in your calendar for the second Wednesday of September, I think that's the 14th, if I'm not mistaken, go and look in your calendar and see if you have a link there. And if you do have something at 6 p.m. on the second Wednesday, delete it, because that is the incorrect Zoom. And then look out for our invitation that will come, actually not until October, because next month we're having a picnic. I also just wanted to remind folks that we always send out a recording and slides and a follow-up the next day. So if you're not able to make it to a huddle, don't worry, we'll be sending a follow-up the next day. The one we are not sending a follow-up for is our in-person meeting, our picnic on Sunday, September 18th, 2 to 5 at Allen Creek Park. And we have a RSVP link, and we really want you to RSVP. For us, you know, we want an opportunity to thank you for all the work that you've been doing for the past couple of years, a lot of you more than a couple of years. You know, it'll make a difference for us to be able to see you in person and thank you. We're hoping, you know, to share food with you, fun and fellowship, and for you guys to make a day of it with all the things that are available at the park. You know, you guys often thank us, but we don't have opportunities to thank you, at least not in person. And so if you guys wouldn't mind right now, putting in the chat, what would make you decide to make the trip to Allen Creek Park to join us for our picnic on September 18th? So are you bringing your family? Do you want there to be games there for children? Would you be interested in participating in a redistricting dessert competition or a worst district piñata or a puzzle? Or is it something more serious? Would you like an exclusive off the record conversation about our next steps and how we would move forward in, you know, towards getting a better system? Do you want presentations? Do you want an invited speaker or a workshop on different strategies, et cetera? Come and tell me something in the chat, because we'll save the chat and we'll take a look at it, and it'll help us to decide what we're going to do. So please give us some feedback. No workshops. So there's at least some feedback right there. Absolutely. That's what we want to know. Just tell us your thoughts. No workshop, fine, but what about a speaker? Or do you not want a speaker? Do you just want to hang out and have an informal conversation? Give us some feedback. We really, really appreciate that. We won't have a huddle by Zoom in September. So the next Zoom huddle will be on the 12th. You know, we hope to see as many people as possible on September 18th. I also wanted to just remind you, I'm sorry, we're kind of quiet on the asking for donations. You know, I write the emails and I kind of, you know, you have to squeeze that out of me. I don't enjoy asking you all for money, but it is an important time to support us because we kind of hoped our work would be done, but it looks like it is not done. We need to keep working. And so showing your support and continuing your support is really helpful as well. We have some links, and again, we send all of these out to you, and so you know we will you know we'll be sending all of this, and go ahead and drop more things in the chat. If we end this meeting before you've had a chance to say what you want to, then go ahead and email us at Fair Districts Ohio, Fair Districts Ohio 2021. Well, unfortunately, that is that email was too optimistic. Dogs. But that's it, guys. That's what we had to share with you tonight. We will save this chat. We will go through it. We will look at your suggestions. We appreciate all of your participation, and we look forward to seeing you. We know that we have a wonderful volunteer who makes buttons. She made our Fair District button, and she's going to be making a button for those folks who are going to be at the picnic. So, and one suggestion for the button was redistricting is no picnic. So you will be the lucky recipients of the Redistricting is no picnic button or something similar. And that is it for today. Thank you so much for attending. We will send all our follow-up out to you tomorrow. Bye, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. I kind of want Arnold to come to our picnic. That's a great idea. I do realize it might not be so easy, seeing as he lives quite a distance away. A big thank you to everybody, and I appreciate people's patience, and I'm sure we're going to have many questions to answer. So please, feel free to give us, send an email, touch base. Thank you again, everybody.
Thanks.
Yes, please.
Night.
I want Arnold to come too. Can we make this
Seriously.
happen? Dan, you're in California. Can you make it happen?
Well, he might be able to make it happen. And a big thank you to Bill Davis, meaning the actual Bill Davis, because I noticed it took a little while for people to get their right name on there, for helping to move people over to the correct Zoom. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Yeah, that
Yes,
didn't work
thank
out
you so
real
much.
well, did it?
Next time we'll put somebody over there. Hope to get that off of everyone's calendar, but it's hard to do. So thank you guys so much. See you all
Bye,
later.
everybody.
Bye.